And a very good evening to you. Welcome to our Thursday edition of Politics 101. Welcome to all of you. Later on, of course, we are going to be joined by Dr. Terrence Blackman, professor of mathematics at Brooklyn University, there in Brooklyn College. And Member of Parliament Nima Flubes from Mocha would be joining us later also. So we have a packed program tonight. Welcome to all of you. If you're joining us from out there in the Caribbean, welcome to Politics 101. Good evening to all of you, whether you're coming at us from Trinidad and Tobago, carnival time in Trinidad and Tobago. So I guess those of you who are there would be preparing for Mass. It's quickly coming in. Guyana, of course, is Mashramani time. So it's also Bacchanal Carnival time in our Guyana. Welcome if you're joining us from Grenada, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. If you're joining us from St. Kitts, Nevis, Antigua and Barbuda, lots of us out there, welcome to Politics 101. And if you're joining us from Brooklyn, there will be one of your own on the program tonight, Dr. Terrence Blackman, who is teaching in Brooklyn. He will be on tonight for his first program, Politics 101. Good evening, Yvonne, my neighbor, my former neighbor, Yvonne, joining us from Barbados. All of you Guyanese in Barbados who are joining us, welcome to Politics 101. Good evening if you're joining us from Canada. Lots of you in Toronto and Ontario, the Ontario province. Welcome. Those of you in Montreal, welcome to Politics 101. In the United States of America, welcome. Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx. Some of you, I understand, are joining us from upstate New York. Welcome to Politics 101. Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. Welcome. Maryland, Virginia, Washington, D.C. itself. Hello to those of you who are joining us from Baltimore, which is part of Maryland, but it's not considered part of the metropolitan area. It's a little bit north of Washington, D.C. itself. Welcome to Politics 101. How about those of you down there in the South? North Carolina, our brother Morgan, Ozia Morgan, down there. Welcome to Politics 101. Welcome, South Carolina. And of course, the people from Atlanta, Georgia, referred to as the Deep South. News coming out of Georgia today is that a grand jury found that there was no evidence to suggest that the polls, the election in Georgia was tampered with as the Trump people had suggested, and they had set up the grand jury. The grand jury found that there was no evidence of fraud, and that some of the people who charged fraud lied on the oath. So that's good news coming out from Georgia. As you know, Georgia, in a sense, won the election for the Democrats last year there. So welcome to Politics 101 if you're joining us from Georgia. How about those of you in Florida? Welcome to Politics 101. And those of you, of course, in Arizona, where I am at the moment. And of course, California, the West Coast people. Welcome to Politics 101. Good evening, Guyana. Good evening, Guyana. Last night, the APNU AFC had a meeting in North Ramveld. I managed to catch part of it. When I was finished with the program last night, I caught the address by the opposition leader. It was good to see the opposition on the road. People feel that you have to come on the road to make trouble. You come on the road as a form of demonstration, public meetings. At the end of the day, you can't be invisible. So it was good to see the opposition on the road last night. And I understand they will be having another meeting on Sunday night somewhere in Georgetown. Last night was North Rumveld, and I don't quite remember where it is on Sunday night, but they're on the road, and that's good. What people want to see is some political activity in which the opposition is demonstrating that it's in the fight. It's in the fight. I've been accused of pushing Aubrey Norton towards confrontation. And one of my friends on the other side suggested that. And if Norton wants to go to confrontation politics, he doesn't need me to push him. And in any case, why do people think that I want confrontation? Well, if they're talking about confrontation in terms of violent confrontation, I don't want that. And that is not for me to determine. Always violence in any society is determined by those who have the keys to violence. And that is the state, all over the world. All over the world. All over the world. I just was listening to the world news in Guinea, in Africa. People are on the streets demonstrating against the military government there, calling for an end. And it's the government that initiated violence, and people on the road, I guess, have to defend themselves. So it's absurd to think that people like me want violent confrontation. For what? Violence begets violence, and then all we do is annihilate others and ourselves. Violent politics is futile, especially the one that is induced by the state. I don't have to defend myself. I think that the opposition needs to be much more militant in defending its supporters, defending their interests, their economic interests, protecting them against the state. I don't know if that is confrontation. I saw the PPP did that when the coalition was in office. That's normal politics. But anyhow, it's good to see the opposition on the road. And of course, last night I announced on this program that the police have put out wanted bulletins for over a dozen people from Haslington, Golden Grove, Nabaklis area. I think one or two are from Victoria. And there is this wanted bulletin for them for engaging in terrorism at Monrepo Market last June during that demonstration. So 8 months later, the police have concluded that terror was committed against the people of Monrepo, and that this terror was carried out by some named people. What is this government really up to? Why are they provoking people? Why are they doing that? They provoked their friends in Buxton the other day. Now they're going and provoking the people of Golden Grove, Nabaklis, and Haslington again. Those people lost their son. They took to the streets for weeks, calling for justice. To this day, they have not gotten justice. And now to assassinate Quindon Bacchus a second time. by putting out a wanted bulletin, ostensibly, I think, to charge them with terrorism. That is nothing more than provocation. Nothing more than provocation. People who were on the road on election week in Lusignan, in Bath Settlement, and other PPP strongholds, nobody has been charged with terror. And this is what we continue to see. The blatant double standards, one-sidedness. They're provoking people. It is not me. I am not pushing anybody to confrontation. Those wanted bulletins are the embodiment of confrontation. They are seeking confrontation with those people again. Anyway, welcome to Politics 101. Please share the link. Dr. Terrence Blackman is already backstage and he's ready to join us. And we're going to be talking tonight about national cohesion in the era of oil and gas wealth. Dr. Blackman is a member of the Guyanese diaspora. He's an associate professor of mathematics and a founding member of the undergraduate program in mathematics at Medgar College. In addition, he's a former Dr. Martin Luther King visiting professor at MIT and a member of the School of Mathematics at the Institute for Advanced Study. He previously served as chair of the mathematics department and dean of the School of Science, Health, and Technology at Medgar Evers. Dr. Blackman also served as an assistant professor in the Department of Education, Research, Policy, and Practice at Margaret's College of Education at the University of Denver, up the road from here. He graduated from Queens College in Guyana. So, Brooklyn College, CUNY, and the City University of New York Graduate School. He is the founder and publisher of the Guyana Business Journal and Magazine. That's the bio of our guest tonight. And later on, we're going to be joined by Nima Flubes to give us an update on what's happening at Moko. Welcome to Politics 101. From Burnham's One People, One Nation, One Destiny to David Granger's Social Cohesion to Irfan Ali's One Guyana. The politicians have always talked the talk of national unity and national cohesion. Sometimes, in my estimation, they have overtalked. Because it's difficult for societies like ours, deeply divided societies, ethnically divided societies, to achieve that aspiration of one people, one nation, one destiny. In fact, I think it was the mistake of the post-colonial leaders, not only in Guyana, but in the wider English-speaking Caribbean. Jamaica, of course, out of one, many. I think they substituted civic identity for cultural identity. That is, they made the country and state synonymous with culture. Guyana's motto really should be several peoples, one culture, one nation, one destiny. Because we are, after 60 years of independence, with all our talk about creating this cohesive Guyana, the ethnic identity of our various groups, from our first peoples, the Amerindians, to the Africans who came against their will, and the other ethnic groups that came after slavery. Each group has held strongly to its cultural heritage. So we have Amerindian Heritage Month. We have Indian Arrival Day. We have African Emancipation. Because culture is centered to people's sense of identity. And when you put several cultures in the same place, you have to do engineering to hold them together. The question is, what do we share in common beyond a geographical space, a flag, a national anthem, and a government? And even governments, we don't share. Because when the government dominated by one ethnic group is in power, the other ethnic group does not recognize it, doesn't see it as legitimate, doesn't recognize their right to govern. So the question is, economists have always told us that once you are able to enlarge the economic pie, that ethnic differences would be minimized because there'll be more to go around. Well, our pie has been enlarged over the last 3 or 4 years. Has our ethnic divide subsided? Is it subsiding? Or is it getting wider? That's our conversation tonight. Is it possible for a national consensus in the age of plenty, relative plenty, of course, or is the age of plenty widening the economic gap and the ethnic gap? Is race and class, is race and class connected? How does race and ethnicity impact class? These are all conversations that we have had over the years. Here we are in 2023, still having those conversations. So we'll seek the perspective of Dr. Terrence Blackman tonight, who I know has been very forthcoming on this subject. He, I suppose, is much more optimistic than some of us. But when you are aspiring to things, you have to have optimism. And you have to be pragmatic. I think we political people have suffered in the past from not enough pragmatism. I will confess that. We have been dogmatic in many cases in our ideological position. I am a Marxist, so I see nothing else if it doesn't flow from the Marxist logic, and so on and so forth, and so on and so forth. So please, let me bring in Dr. Blackman now, and let's get the conversation started. Good evening, Dr. Blackman.
Good evening, Dr. Hines. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you and your guests this evening. Thank you for the invitation, and I look forward to the conversation.
Well, let's start right away. How have we done since independence on this question of national cohesion and national oneness?
Well, I think when we speak of, say, national cohesion, I think what we're where we're referring to sort of, the degree of unity, the degree of solidarity, the degree of harmony that exists among the citizens of a country. And I think that, so I have to say I was born in 1968. And so I grew up in the 70s and the 80s. And I think if I were to look back on my childhood and my growing up in the society, I at the moment that I grew up thought that we had perhaps the best, the most cohesive place, and as a child. But I think that, as we have come to adulthood and as we have moved beyond these sort of racial groups that you just articulated, I think we recognize that we have historically not had the kind of social cohesion that some of us imagine. We have been a divided place, and Guyana, simply because of the way in which we've lived, uh, it's very hard for us to kind of take the temperature of what's happening in many of the other communities. I think it's only now with the advent of the social media and other aspects that we are beginning to really have a full sense of the feelings that people have relative to each other. And so I think that if you ask me the question, uh, is Guyana a place that is unified? Is Guyana a place in which there is solidarity? Is Guyana a place in which there's harmony among the citizens, among all of the citizens of Guyana? Then I think the answer to that question would be there's much more work to be done. If wherever we are today, we all, as you have just reflected in your introduction, the many challenges that Afro-Guyanese face, the question of Mon Repos, the Indo-Guyanese will perceive challenges in that context also. Uh, you know, Recently we saw the announcement yesterday or the day before of the Hess carbon credit dollars going to our indigenous brothers and sisters. I think you rightly identified it, that we have many peoples as part of Guyana that we're trying to bring together in a nation, and we haven't always told uh, our history in a way that sort of brings us together. And so we're not. I think we're not, as I see it, a place where we have a very strong national identity that emerges out of this cultural diversity, a place where we have meaningful socioeconomic equality. Uh, so, that's the question. So, will the oil wealth change this? I think that's the question that we want. Or maybe I think the better question would be to ask, what can we do with the oil wealth that can move us closer to a society uh, that has some social and political stability, and that is unified in some way, and that we have some consensus. I'll give a hypothetical. I'm a big fan of cricket, and you know, I quite often have discussions with people who are involved in cricket. And one of the questions which has sort of arisen, many, I've always asked, suppose we have a Guyanese team that was all Indo-Guyanese. Would that be a representative of Guyana? Suppose we had a Guyanese national cricket team that was all Afro-Guyanese. Would that be a representative cricket? Would we be able to be? Would we all be satisfied that that team represented every single Guyanese? And so I start with that question as a way of thinking about this question of unity. And I think that you consider that, you begin to see that uh, we're not going to be satisfied if that's the team that was chosen by our national selectors. And so we need to think about ways in which we integrate, way we represent ourselves to the world. And that's the challenge for us at this moment. And in a sense, this is part of why I'm a part of this conversation, because I see us kind of moving in a direction that will that will make it very, very, very difficult for us to come back together as one something.
Thank you very much. And you introduced two concepts there right off the bat. And the first concept is how we think about each other. In my introduction, I talked about how we think about ourselves as a starting off point. But you made the observation that part of our problem and part of the problem of ethnically divided societies is that we are constantly evaluating ourselves against our neighbors, against our co-ethnics. And so therefore, it's how we think. And sometimes it goes both ways, because and I'm sure you have heard in the Black community where sometimes our parents tell us, why can't you emulate the Indians? Right? Why can't you do like the Indians? But you also hear them the next hour saying that those Indians are not good people. So you have that kind of thing. And I've been reliably informed that in the Indian community, you have the same kind of challenge. Look at the Black people. Look how, whether they dress better or whatever the case may be, but with the same or the next corner of the mouth, those people are no good people. So you have this dilemma that is not just how we think about ourselves, but how we think about each other. And then that combination itself becomes a barrier to the swift or relatively swift national cohesion that we crave. Your take on that?
No. I think this is absolutely, this is, look, as I just described, any Guyanese boy or girl growing up in Guyana in the 1970s, let's say coming of age in the late 1970s and the early 1980s, we went through a period in our public life where all of the pejoratives for describing people of other ethnic groups was something that was severely suppressed, both in our homes and in our political language, in our social language. There are some words that were never expressed in that context, right? And so, for me, someone looking at Guyana now in 2023 and looking at some of the things that emerge, some of the comments that people make on the internet and so on, it is almost as if we've gone backward in this sense, right? So we've allowed sort of all of those things which we had heretofore tried to suppress to become a part of our normal political discourse. And I don't know which one is better or not, but I somehow think that we were onto something in the 70s and the early 80s by eschewing a certain kind of way of describing each other. I jokingly refer to some of my colleagues by saying, it was better when I was calling you a comrade, because it was an easier thing, and we removed some of these pejoratives that go to making it very, very difficult for us to really have proper conversations about, as you rightly described, we need some kind of national convergence. Our indigenous people hold to their culture, Afro-Guyanese hold to their culture, Indo-Guyanese hold to their culture. We're obviously infused with each other's culture through our various ways of being, or sport, or music, or food, etc. But Guyana, as distinct from Trinidad, which I think is a much more culturally integrated society, is not. I mean, we still have. I mean, I grew up in a grandmother's Alexander village. The Afro-Indo divide, while we played cricket together, we attended the puja ceremony together, and we attended the church together, and so on. I mean, there were still challenges of people marrying across ethnic lines. So I think we often want to have a kind of imagined unity, and know that you characterize me as pragmatic. I think that we have to deal with the reality. The reality is that there are these communities that have these challenges, and I think it's important to have them. You can have those privately, but when you come to the polity, when you come to the commonwealth, then I think you have to that's where you have to make the arguments about what we are, the civic society. I think that's where you have to make the I think it's hard for us to expect the kind of cultural changes that often people seem to want. It's like, they randomly call for a one people, one nation, one death. It's like a religion, but it's not a reality. We have not been one people, one nation. Some people, I mean, I would say one of the other things that we've noted growing up in the 1970s, 80s, there was a heavy preponderance on a national identity. We sang the national songs. I think surprising for me in the 2000s, 2015, 20, almost a paucity of the national songs. So this question of one people, one nation is very hard. And I think we ought to take a step back from it and not try to force this imagined unity. There was if you can ask, was there a time in the past when Guyana was a unified place and all Guyanese, uh, and the answer to that question honestly will be no. And so I think for me, as a son of Guyana who sort of traveled around the world and seen various people, and say, okay, looking back at my own place, what should I tell my brothers and sisters about? Well, what I want to tell them is, look, I think it might be better to think about how you think about eradicating poverty. 43% of the society is living on less than $5.50 a day. What are some of the technical things that we can do to help uh, mitigate the question of poverty? I mean, we see these videos all the time where people are talking about how difficult it is to do various things on a day-to-day basis, and this is true. This is happening at the same time we are, you know, we have a budget of a multi-billion dollar budget, right? I think it's easier to think now about focusing on eradicating poverty across all of our racial groups. I think it's easier to think about providing quality and inclusive education in a meaningful way. I mean, you know, Guyana is a country in which less than a very small percentage of our country has tertiary education. You're not going to develop in a very serious way if you don't move that in the right direction. So I think it's better for us to have that argument. Uh, you know, I think it's better for us to think about how we have our people literate. Literacy by race, literacy by sex, literacy by ethnicity, literacy by religion. I think these are the questions that we have to really begin to address, rather than trying to, somehow find ourselves with a kind of imagined unity. I think questions look every time I read the newspapers about some kind of domestic violence, and it's this question of gender and the role of a certain kind of gender equity, gender equality. I think this is something that we need to be thinking about in some serious way. I mean, I grew up I've noted in this recently the big, huge discussion about the gas to energy project and so on. The point is, in a very realistic sense, energy is important. You grew up in the 70s, we had blackouts. It's now 2023, we still have blackouts. That is a national issue. That is not an issue that is related to, the Afro-Guyanese community or the Indo. They're both suffering from. And so these are the places where I think we can find ways to work together to achieve a certain kind of inclusive, sustainable economic development. And I think that in some ways, this kind of this kind of hard, this sort of more, how do I characterize it? A more negotiated approach to what's going on. Uh, think wages and livable wages. Well, these are the discussions that I think that the representatives of the various ethnic groups, political parties, etc., however you want to characterize the factions, ought to be involved in thinking, how do we negotiate livable wages for our people in the society? Because I don't think, like I said, I grew up in, my grandmother's from Alexander. Well, my folks are from my grandmother's from the Pomeroon, and they came to Alexander Village, and I've lived there for many, many, many years. I mean, I still go back there. Uh, my parents' house is in North Ranville, where you just described the meeting of the folks in North Ranville. So we've had a lot of arguments about that kind of thing. Also, questions of, how was that community formed and who was it formed for? Coming out of Carrie Festa and all of the other things. But what's important is, appropriate housing, livable wages, and so on. And so I think I want to take the label of being a pragmatist, in part because I think that we're not going to solve your question of national cohesion, at least in the near term. And I think we can do better on some of these things in the near term and hope to get to a place where we have a slightly better, social milieu to work with. And I also don't think that at this moment, Guyanese are challenges. One can see them, but I also think that in a very real way, sometimes these racial and ethnic clashes, so to speak, they undermine our chance at working on these challenges that can substantively change the lives of people. So I know I've said a lot, but I've kind of given what I view as a sort of, not non-ideological, more pragmatic approach to solving some of the challenges that face Guyana at this moment.
Dr. Terrence Blackman, professor of mathematics at Medgar Evers College in Brooklyn. Lots of Guyanese graduated from that institution. Yeah. Lots of West Indian. Sometimes people say it's a West Indian university. And I take your point that in the 70s and the 80s, we were closer to that moment of independence. And I take your point that they were if you will, the markings of what we could become as a national community. And I think there are a couple of things. I think ideologically, there was not much difference in terms of the political establishment. My God, when the Americans invaded Grenada in 1983, I was in front of the American embassy. There was the PPP, communists, PNC, Marxist-Leninists, WPA, independent Marxists, all three of them, they agreed on that issue of Grenada. Which takes me to the next question, that our Guyanese-ness was part of a larger West Indian-ness. Our cricketers, including our Guyanese cricketers, were beating the world. And so we saw ourselves as more West Indian. And so that our national differences were subsumed and were tempered under that larger West Indian identity. And I think our leaders did not muster the will to match that cultural sense of nation with a political sense of nation. And so things began to unravel as the Cold War came to an end in the 1980s. But I'm very glad you made that observation, because that takes me to my next question. You have laid out some pragmatic steps that we could take to at least bring national cohesion closer to where we would like it to be. But are there some prerequisites, Dr. Blackman? You mentioned in your opening statement the whole notion of equality as an issue that we have not dealt with, the question of class equality in terms of the rate of poverty in our countries. Are there some prerequisites that have to be in place before these pragmatic experiments that you are proposing can happen?
No, I mean, let's take the issue of poverty. Uh, I mean, so we can look to places that have done. Let's just take a simple. We have noted in the recent uh, actions on the part of the current government, quite frequently, the distribution of grants. So we saw the distribution of grants to fishermen who had lost some of their produce at some place. We saw the distribution of grants to sugar workers who had lost some of their livelihood. We saw, we have an ongoing uh, process that goes to, giving monies for school children and so on. It seems a very reasonable thing, and this is something that is not completely crazy. We have had here in the United States, for example, uh, President Biden, when he first came into power, uh, the Treasury, put into the accounts of a number of people, a certain number of dollars per month per child, and the results were that this was one of the most effective programs in terms of reducing child poverty in the United States. So it is not impossible I remember, at some point in the early part of the previous administration, there was a huge discussion, the Buxton proposal, about whether or not it would be an unreasonable thing to directly uh, uh, put monies into the hands of poor people. Well, the research is clear. These cash transfers to poor people are actually one of the most effective ways of dealing with the question of poverty. Someone should be arguing for that in the political sphere, and so the prerequisite is someone taking the policy position into the national debate and saying, why have these one-off things when we can do something that is systemic, something that is built in, something that covers the entire country, so that we're not waiting for. I think that's one of the biggest criticisms I would think of the current governing policymaking sphere, is that far too many people are in this position where they're seeing the cranes and the developments around them, but this human development that is necessary to see some impact on their lives, to see some impact on Kaikan Street in North Ranville, where so our families were among the first families who moved to this place. So that I think is what has to happen. Uh, the prerequisite is putting the policy position on the agenda that says we are, as a governing group, as a party, we are willing to have some way in which, as in Alaska, in which every Guyanese citizen or every Guyanese family has some kind of economic help in that comes from the national treasury, because we can afford it in this moment. Uh, there has to be some aspect like that, and uh, I don't see many people carrying it. Often, you get the discussion. Well, you shouldn't give people money, because when you give poor people money, they spend it. Everyone spends the money, and quite often poor people know best about what's going on in their lives, and so I don't see that kind of thing happening, and I would love to see that someone revive the Buxton proposal and have that be a part of the national agenda around which people can cast their votes at a poll to say this is something that we want or this is something that we don't want.
Thank you very much, Dr. Blackman. Of course, the Buxton proposal was the product of the Working People's Alliance, to which I belong. Dr. Professor Clive Thomas unveiled it in Buxton in 2018, igniting, as you said, a very fierce conversation. And I shall take back your message to the WPA that they need to put that Buxton proposal back on the agenda in a real serious way. We are joined by the Honorable Nima Flubes, the parliamentarian for the Partnership for National Unity, AFC, from Mocha, Arcadia. And as you know, Mocha's been on the news. We've been covering Mocha since the events, those shameful events a few months ago, a couple of months ago. We know that Ipadaji, as a fund for those who are affected, and up to when they were here 2 weeks ago, they had raised in excess of $3,000. I think they reported 3,000 US dollars. We know that the case has been taken up by a couple of lawyers. They were here on Monday night. The two lawyers, they have given the government the opportunity for a settlement out of court. And they're saying that if the government does not want to mediate, they have a strong case for those people, and they will be going to court. But they're giving the government a chance for mediation. And of course, the opposition parties, I'm sure, are continuing to engage the people of Moko, because this is not just about the 7 families. This is about an entire community. So we have Sister Nima Flubes here, who's going to give us a report on how things are going in the village, where things are from the standpoint of the community. Good evening, Madam Flubes. How are you?
Good evening.
Good evening, Dr. Hines. Good evening to your guests. Good evening to all the viewers. It's a privilege to be here with you. For an update on our community, I hope you can hear me well, because
Yes,
I'm
I'm
sitting
hearing
in
you
my
quite
vehicle. I just actually came from outreach with the folks at Caneview. We have someone from overseas that is visiting, and so she brought some items for them. And so I was able to leave Georgetown, take her up to go meet with the families, spend some time with the families, and get back so that I could have joined you at least to bring you up to date. In relation to the families at Caneview, I must again publicly say thank you for all the support we have been receiving. They've been receiving encouraging words. They've been receiving support in kind so that they can function from their day-to-day basis. For the children, it has been a tremendous challenge because of the psychological effect that has had on them. I can tell you that one of the 2-year-old who was very, very active in school and participating in what she loves, being with the people there, she has turned to a position of not being so engaging now, but complains bitterly that the police is coming to take her home and break down the home. So we're working on getting the necessary help to help them psychologically in terms of counseling, so that they'll be able to do what they have to do to overcome these challenges. Generally, as a community, we're working. Of course, you know, the PPP continue to play the politics, the nasty politics they're playing, coming into the community, not engaging the relevant and elected authorities of our community. And they just come in and do as they please, walk around. And there are a few residents who are encouraging them, but I know that our people are not asleep and they're fully well aware of our history and what needs to be done to preserve our community and our history. We cannot allow a government to just come and barge in and do as they please. We will continue to demand the lands at Caneview, as I would have reported yesterday when I spoke at a public meeting, that that area currently up to today we visited, the government, they have a whole lot of mud, heaps of mud stockpile in the area where these persons once had their homes and their businesses. They have stockpiled a whole lot of mud in the area. So in the community generally, we continue to work, we continue to engage our residents, we continue to educate them. As you know, this is Black History Month, and we must be reminded that we're the ones who have to tell our story. No one should be telling our story. And so we continue to engage our people and educate them on the importance of preserving our history and what we have. Dr. Hines, growing up in the village, I always take great pride in listening to my elders. And there are certain things our elders would have done to preserve our community. And so it is our responsibility now to take the necessary steps to protect our community from this PPPC administration, which would have destroyed the village before, and now they're there again trying to make mischief.
Thank you very much for that update. Has word gotten around the community that the lawyers are engaging this matter and they are approaching the government for some just mediation, and barring that they're prepared to take this matter to court? And if so, if the community has gotten word about this initiative, what is their response?
Well, I can tell you our initial preparation for this particular matter. We could not have given a lot of information out until we have finished and completed what needs to be done to have the necessary preparation in place. Now that the lawyers, you've given them the chance to speak on the legal front, I would not speak on that. And it's now public. Yes, we're engaging our residents, and they are aware. And they're being formally involved in understanding what are the steps that will be taken. Because in our community, we have a lot of steps to take to protect our lands. And I want to call on people who have their lands that have not taken steps to protect it, have your right documentation and protect yourself. You better get going and get engaged with the necessary legal advice and direction in helping to preserve what you have. It's really sad to know that you have a government that took the oath of office. It's something that keeps bothering my mind. How could you take the oath of office to say you will serve people without affection and ill will? And then look at the steps you've taken. We saw what happened only last weekend with the lady on Terrence Street. You know why that's happening? Because they have done it before and they appear to be getting off with it. It appears that way. And so they feel that they continue to operate as though we are in a time of plantation life.
Thank you there for that perspective, and I completely agree with you. You spoke last night at the meeting at North Rheinfeldt.
So these are the things, yeah.
Yeah, and I, from what I heard, this will be a series of public meetings by the APNU AFC. Is there any meeting planned for Mocha, Arcadia, to ground with the people there? I mean, public meeting? We seem to have lost.
We will have a meeting soon. That information will be published in a short while.
In a short while. Sister Nima Flubes, the parliamentarian for the East Bank area and a proud resident of Mocha, Arcadia. And I make very clear on this program where my preferences are. And I have said on this program that I know parliamentarians on the opposition side are challenged because you don't have the kind of power and clout in the parliament. And so I have always said that an opposition parliamentarian should be an activist. And that I think that if a parliamentarian that comes closest to an activist parliamentarian is this parliamentarian who is on air tonight. And I didn't include Brother Sherrod because he's in a league by himself. But Sister Nima Flubes, I think, is doing an excellent job of grounding with the people in the community in an activist way. Anything you want to tell us before you go, Nima?
Yes, I must say to our viewers and to our people, we have to stand up as a people against marginalization, against victimization, against vindictiveness by this PPPC administration. Those who support such actions should really sit and think to themselves, what is going on? Just like how they have attacked the people that came to you and all the other persons they continue to attack. If you sit idly by and allow this PPPC administration to continue doing what they're doing, they will make our lives miserable. And so, like I would have been doing before I became a parliamentarian, always engaging and being active in my community, I continue to do the same now. And I want to encourage more persons to become an activist in your community on the interest of your community. Don't sell your community for 2 cents. It makes no sense. Think about the next generation to come and all the other children, what they will inherit and what can happen. And remember, a people without a land are refugees. We should not become refugees in our own country. And so I thank you for having me tonight.
And thank you for answering the call. I know we were expecting you on Monday, but you had some bad reception. Tonight it was better. And thank you so much for updating us on the developments there in Moco Arcadia. I shall certainly be in touch with you in the coming days and weeks. Thank you very much, dear, to Nima Flubes. Dr. Blackman, let's try to locate the developments in Mocha Arcadia within the context of our conversation tonight. And that is our aspiration for a more cohesive society. In the midst of that kind of action there in Mocha on the part of one political actor, that is the party in government. And the racial and ethnic undertones and overtones that accompany that action there and similar actions is pragmatism. And I go back to that label. How does a pragmatist engage the notion of national cohesion within the context of that kind of action that I think goes to the heart of people's human instincts? This is, for me, it's beyond politics, human instincts. Your volume.
I muted myself. So
Yes.
let me begin by saying that first to thank MP Bess for the report. Let me also say that, you know, as a child, so I went to Central Primary School, and one of my closest friends at Central Primary School was a young man named, well, not so young man now, named Mark Hodge, and he was from Maka. So I'm quite familiar with Maka as a village, and I've visited many times, and I know a few people who are there, and yeah. And let me also say unequivocally that, you know, the action of bulldozing people's houses is out of bounds, and it does not have a place in a normal civil society. They should have been, there was no way that that action ought to have taken place in the way that it did. And, and it kind of, as the MP was describing, I had the thought that, quite often, folks are saying you know, to Afro-Guyanese about the importance of them doing business. And in a very ironic twist, here were people who were involved in business, and and their businesses were in some sense destroyed. So having said that, I think, as MP Best rightly pointed out, that it's important to think about what it means to defend and leave a community as an inheritance. As she noted, people without the land will become refugees in their own land. So it is vitally important for these lands to be transferred to the children and the grandchildren and the great grandchildren of the people who own them. But this is where I think it's important for us to have a pragmatic approach and a rigorous approach, in the sense of what are the requirements for ownership in this moment within the context. As your guest, I listened very carefully to your guest, who is undertaking, Dr. Vivian Williams, and the other gentlemen who were undertaking this legal proceeding, as they rightly characterize. The law is a function of the economics. The law is a function of the society. The law is a function of the politics. And so part of what I'm saying is that, there ought to be folk who are thinking about this in a proactive sense. So we've seen this happen once. You've seen it happen twice. You've seen it happen 3 times. At some point, you have to say, I need to be prepared on all of the fronts to address this kind of issue when it happens. And I want to say that part of that front has to be some kind of engagement with the entity that is performing that action. I think we're positioning in a way, sort of Afro-Guyanese as kind of second-class players in their own country. So you can't withdraw into the village and say, well, okay, I'm not going to talk to those people who are coming with the force of law, with the bulldozer, to demolish your business. And so there have to be some people who are engaged in a meaningful conversation with the House. Obviously, I certainly reject the notion of the sense of which this was done. We had to do this because we didn't want to look weak in front of some audience. This is perhaps an unfortunate characterization from the people who are who are involved in moving this piece of the agenda. But I think there has to be representatives from Maka who are having a conversation, who are representing the people and having a conversation with elements of the government who are involved in this. I think to withdraw from that sphere, as I'm sure there has to be people who are standing up and forming a human barricade and saying that this is, as there have to be lawyers. And so I think it's this full spectrum. And what I think is, what I see quite often missing is the sense that protests and the developed community defense only involves one aspect of the thing. And I think that we have to understand that this is the totality of the society, and to see that it's important to contest, it's important to affirm the community's rights across the spectrum. And so that would be the way in which a pragmatist. I want lawyers, I want community activists, I also want the representatives, the political representatives who are part of the parliament, to be engaged with their opposite number in a serious dialogue about why it just seems that you're in a way ceding part of your power to just simply wait for someone to act and then for you to react. I mean, there should have been some parliamentary committee at this moment that was engaged with the government saying these actions, we want to avoid them in the future. And let's sit down and figure out this kind of hardening with negotiation. Let's sit down and understand what is the protocol for doing something so that everyone understands what's going on. And that there should be a clear announcement from both sides that this was an unacceptable thing and it will no longer be the process for the future. So that's the pragmatist. The pragmatist says you have to be involved in the conversation and you have to think about your interest in that conversation and you have to advocate those interests in across the sphere of policy influences that are available.
Dr. Terrence Blackman here on Politics 101 tonight, in a sense reflecting the diversity in this conversation that we've been having over the last 3 years on these programs and on this program in particular. I have always been open to inviting the different voices because I do believe diversity is the gateway to the kind of cohesion and unity that we're talking about. That our groups are not monolithic. The Black community is not monolithic. The Indian Guyanese community is not monolithic. The Amerindian community is not monolithic. And I think we have been strongest whenever we have engaged our diversity. My own support for the no opposition coalition in 2020, despite my discomfort with the way in which they governed in a general way, my support for them was based on the actual and potential diversity within the quote-unquote coalition. And I still continue to believe, and so I embrace Dr. Blackman's view that it should be lawyers, it should be the parliament, it should be the community. There should be resistance, but there should also be conversation. And I think that is a very important addition to the conversation here. Yes, we're accustomed to a more kind of radical talk on a program like this. And I think sometimes we have to step back.
Often people mistake, communication for the lack of seriousness about one's interest. I think you can't express seriousness about, if you're interested in getting something done, you can't get it done all by yourself. You have to get it done with we started off this conversation talking about, this imagine one people, one nation, one destiny. Indo-Guyanese, indigenous Guyanese are all part of Guyana. And I think that we have to, at this point, sort of recognize that, MP Bess, beautiful, people without a land become refugees. But I will also say that we should be mindful that when brothers fight with each other, then a stranger will inherit their land. And I think that there is a larger context in which all of this is happening. And some wise people have to understand that, Guyana is a part of South America. Guyana is a part of the Caribbean. Guyanese are a part of the globe. And so there is a local fight, but there is also a global fight. And we're a part of that. And you cannot just simply have one strategy. And I know that this is, you should never assume that someone is not on your side because someone says, I think if you're a member of parliament, you are a member of parliament. And the members of parliament are your peers. And you are there to represent your community in that context. So there is a mechanism that is established and you have to use it. You have to use all of the mechanisms. And I don't mean that as a criticism. I mean that as just a simple statement of here's how you get something done. And to not sort of position yourself as the person who is being who is reacting to someone else's. I mean, we've seen this. Uh, you've seen this happen once. You've seen it happen twice. You've seen it happen 3 times. You've seen it happen 4 times. How many more times do you need to see it before you have some clear understanding that there is a way to put a stop to this and to say to the people who are involved with it, here are the consequences of doing these kinds of things, and here's what we need to talk about so that we maintain this harmonious polity that we're discussing. So, I hope my remarks are not being perceived in a sort of uh, in a kind of contesting way, but simply as a kind of saying, here's some guidance from someone who sees the world in a slightly different way. And I think it goes to the importance of having some views in our conversation that are often kind of suppressed because we tend to feel that, if we are not unified, then that unity, that we're not going to be strong. But you, in diversity is the strength, and it just depends on how that is purpose towards the end of particular groups. That's the point. You need to have all of your voices. You need to have your doctors, your medical doctors, your pastors, your mathematicians, your chemists, your biologists. These are all of the people who give strength to your community. When you take these people away and you don't listen to what they say, then you're left with just a small group that cannot, by very definition, manage the challenges that face a huge polity, right? Some challenges are education, some challenges are economics, some challenges are health, some challenges are so. You need to have people who have expertise in those various areas. It's a normal thing, and I think we're in a sense sometimes our conversation is depriving our community of all of its assets to be able to challenge, to be able to deal with some of these issues. And I want to
Dr.
say that
Terrence,
I say that as in a spirit of community. I don't say this in a spirit of antagonism or anything else. Yeah.
Dr. Terrence Blackman there, bringing to bear on our program another aspect of our thought, another aspect of our worldview, which is a diverse worldview. We keep forgetting that we became Africans in the Americas. We were not Africans in Africa. We were different tribes, different ethnic groups. And when we got on the ship, we became Métis. That's where Mati come from. The term Mati come from when we got on the ship and we looked around and we saw all our foreparents had in common was this skin and the common treatment on that ship. And they became Métis. And by the time it got down to us, it become Mati. And so sometimes the forced unity, a linear unity with no diversity, could be our worst enemy. Dr. Blackman, I want to thank you so much for coming on tonight and sharing with us your thoughts. Of course, we have just scratched the surface. And you and I, of course, will see each other next week when we face a different audience with a similar conversation. And I can assure you that what Dr. Blackman says to this audience here tonight is what he's been saying to a mainly Indo-Guyanese audience, where he and I are part of a program every other Wednesday night on Globe Span. So I want to thank you for being true and not to say one thing to one audience and say something else to another audience.
Dr. Hines, let me make one comment. My roots are in the Pomeroon. And, the words of the people who were enslaved have come down to me. The people who were in my family, my mother tells me this all the time, who were enslaved, they ended up buying these coconut plantations. My relatives are still there and they own these things. The point is, Black people have always used lots of strategies to do the kinds of things that they need to do. And I think that we have increasingly, sometimes we've narrowed our perspectives in ways that I think we need to think about. So, and in this context, I think maybe my last thought here, we wanted to talk about the national cohesion and oil wealth. And I want to say, unequivocally, as the budget, Guyana is a wealthy country. And Afro-Guyanese, Indo-Guyanese, indigenous Guyanese all deserve to share in that. And the only way that they're going to be able to share in an equitable manner is if there is a conversation between the people who represent these various groups. It's their politics or political parties are mapped onto or racial identities. But the wise heads have to stand up at this moment, and they have to be able to go to a room and sit down and negotiate the people's business. If they don't, I can say it here on your program, and we'll come back 5 years. If we don't, we will find ourselves in, if we think that the situation is bad today, if we can't summon to have meaningful engagement across the political spectrum, 5 years from now, we will have this conversation and we'll see what emerges. And
thank you so much, Dr. Blackman, on behalf of our Politics 101 family. Thank you for coming on, and I can assure you, you will be back shortly for us to continue this conversation, because tonight was really the preamble, if you will, to the question that we are getting at: national cohesion in the age of oil and gas wealth. Thank you very much, my
Thank you very much,
brother. Thank you. And to your audience, thank you so much. Tomorrow night, of course, is Black Matters. Black Matters tomorrow night. I think I'm having the people from the 1823 Coalition on tomorrow night, where we're going to be talking about 1823 and 2023. 1823 and 2023. The 1823 Coalition is going to be on here tomorrow night. Dr. Simpson, De Silva, and others. So please join us tomorrow night for our Friday night Politics 101 program, Black Matters. We are following that wanted bulletin for the people at Golden Grove. I say it's provocation. I say it's provocation. I say it's provoking those people. Thank you so much. Please subscribe to our YouTube channels. Politics 101 with Dr. David Hines, Hindsight with Dr. David Hines, our 2 YouTube channels. Make sure you go and you subscribe to those channels so that if ever there is some technical difficulty on Facebook, we can get on to Politics 101 on those channels. The coalition is on the road. Last night they were in North Renville. I understand they'll be somewhere in Georgetown, South Georgetown, on Sunday night. You can pick that information up if you're in the vicinity. Please go out to the public meeting. See you all tomorrow night for another edition of Politics 101. And remember, love is the watchword.